science professor Allan Saxe from the University of Texas at Arlington. Yeah, I appreciate have a chance to talk to you about Donald Trump's first day. He's got pretty big plans for his first day in office. And, I think that's not unusual. A lot of politicians these days say, hey, this is what I'm going to do on day one. But it's not always as easy as said, right?
Absolutely. You're correct. What I've been encountering, however, is that a lot of people want details from Donald Trump. He hadn't been sworn in to office yet, and they want the details, of what's going on. The details have to be hammered out between him and his staff and the legislative branch. He's going to honor the legislative branch, I think, a lot more than President Obama did. So when people want details, of course the details are not there yet. But the general outlines of where he wants to go is pretty well set in place. They're going to redo Obamacare. A little bit that's already been discussed. They're not going to get rid of it entirely, but they are going to take some good parts out, take the bad parts out, and try to compromise on some kind of a bill. And the details, of course, are not there. What's interesting is that when you think about Obamacare, most members of Congress said when it was passed they hadn't even read the bill. So that just startles me. I would have to say that all the time. And that very famous expression, infamous by now, by Nancy Pelosi, who was the then Speaker of the House, we will have to pass the bill before you will know what is in it. That's just astounding to me.
Well,
So when people want details of President Trump, sure, the details will come out later on. But also immigration, tax reform, that iconic wall on the border, and I think a very changed foreign policy is all going to be in place.
Yeah, as part of his at least initial agenda when he gets in there, those are some of his campaign promises. Let me ask you about his ability to rescind these executive orders. There's been a lot of focus on that.
That's a great question. Some of the executive orders he's able to rescind, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I think he's going to do that during the first week in office. He's going to rescind a lot of President Obama's executive orders, but others he cannot rescind so easily as I understand it. It'll take some legislative action, and that I think he'll proceed with, but a lot more slowly. But I think we're going to see some issues done very, very quickly by executive order, and he'll be able to hold up a piece of paper and say, I did what I said I was going to do. And I think he has to perform on that because that was one of the things he talked about immediately. When he comes into office, he's going to rescind a lot of executive orders. By the way, many of the presidential candidates said the same thing, that if they came into office, one of the first things they were going to do is those executive orders by President Obama, which they believe are uncalled for and maybe even unconstitutional.
Donald Trump said that he's officially recognizing, Monday the 23rd is his first day in office and not necessarily Friday. I wouldn't be surprised to see him work through the weekend, though.
I wouldn't either. It's really interesting. He also is aggravating the press. The press does not like him, as I'm finding out. Even people that you think would be on his side. But the alternate press, not the alternate press, the old media, boy, they don't like Donald Trump. And he's made it even matter yet because he wants to change the venue of the press conferences to a larger venue where more people will be invited. And the old line, I call them the old line media, they don't like that. They want to be the main conduit to the world. And what Donald Trump is saying, it's okay, you'll be there at the conferences, but we're going to expand it. More people will be able to be there. And boy, that's not making a lot of the old media happy.
Yeah, I wonder what he means by that, and whether or not how big of a threat that is to the media, because he could move it to the East Room. And I've been in both of those rooms, which could accommodate a lot more people. Ronald Reagan held a lot of news conferences in that room.
Exactly. You make a very good point, and I think that's what we're going to see Donald Trump. They even said they may even move it somewhere outside the Capitol grounds to a much larger venue. I want to say his hotel in Washington, D.C.
No.
I doubt if it's going to be there or not, but just a larger place. What is interesting, the courts have ruled that the general public and the press have equal standing under the First Amendment. The press likes to believe, Meryl Streep said this a week ago at her very famous speech where she talked about the media is our defenders of freedom. Only partially, Ms. Streep. The American public also has a role in this. And Donald Trump has said as much. Bring in the bloggers, bring in these people. And I think he's making it more transparent, and he does this with his Twittering as well, going over the heads of the press, and they don't like that one bit.
Not at all. We're talking to Professor Allan Saxe from the University of Texas at Arlington. Since it is Dr. Martin Luther King Day and this whole dust-up with Congressman John Lewis, the timing is not ideal for Donald Trump. But how legitimate do you believe it is for Trump to be upset with John Lewis calling his election, illegitimate?
Nobody is above criticism. John Lewis is a great icon of the civil rights movement, no question about that. But even the great men and women of our day are due for criticism. Nobody's above criticism. These are human beings. They say some things. They're partisan. They have prejudices. He was tremendous in one area of his life, maybe not so much in other areas. And the same thing is true of all of us. So I think that Donald Trump was in his right to criticize John Lewis for not attending the inauguration. If you want to keep traditions and symbolism, which President Obama has talked about a lot, we need to keep tradition and symbolism and culture, and he's right about that. John Lewis is stepping outside of that particular arena, and Donald Trump is criticizing him for it, and I think rightfully so. But there's a whole bunch of other Democratic congressmen, many of them from California, who are going to follow along, and they're not going to be there either. I think it's bad on their part as well. Sometimes in order to keep tradition and symbolism alive, you have to obey the traditions and go along with it. You may not like Donald Trump. We don't like a lot of things in life, but there are traditions and culture that you must go along with, or should go along with. Not must, but should.
As a professor of political science, you've obviously observed these political cycles for years. I mean, in our lifetimes, have you ever seen anything quite like this, or what we're about to experience with the Trump presidency?
Yeah, we really have. You can't compare every part of it. This is a wild one. There's no question about that. For years, we've always said, why don't we have somebody from the non-political world run for high office? And so I tell people, well, here he is, So we want these things, but then when they appear, well, that's not quite what we wanted. But here it is. And I think that he's doing much better. I think that a lot of people would have believed, and that's what they don't like. They don't like the fact that he's doing so well and refuses to capitulate to the Republican establishment and to the Democratic opposition. They don't like that. They want to become more traditional. Well, he's not. And the American public, by all accounts, is very dissatisfied with our political order. And here's a man that's going to upset the apple cart, maybe, very much so. I am just waiting for the press. If he becomes more traditional and goes along more with the Republican establishment, they're going to jump on him as well. So he's in a position where darned if you do and darned if you don't. But I think he's going to be a very interesting person. But going back to your original question, during the administration and the inauguration of Lyndon Baines Johnson, one has to remember, during that era, there were demonstrations in cities. Cities were on fire. It was a terrible, terrible thing. Vietnam was raging. And so when LBJ was sworn into office, it was not a good time either. And then his protege, when Hubert Humphrey was sworn into office, it was even more bellicose yet. Those were not good days. Richard Nixon, when he was sworn into office, I heard yesterday when his two daughters were walking across the campus at some big university that they actually were spat upon, which is just completely out of bounds. So we've had some tough times during inaugurations and during administrations. I hope this is not another one.
Very good point and good perspective. Professor Allan Saxe, thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir. It's greatly appreciated.